So this is just a video for the nerdos out there who want to know how our body regulates and decides whether or not we're going to continue taking in fuel substrates like carbs, fat and protein and turn them into energy, or whether or not we store them as fat. And actually what we're using here in a big way are free radicals. And essentially what we do is when we are breaking down any of these fuel substrates, whether it is carbs, fat or protein, doesn't matter, they all end up going into the mitochondria and being something called acetyl-CoA. And essentially we will put that acetyl-CoA into something called the Krebs cycle. Long story short, it's this spinning wheel essentially of we're taking acetyl-CoA, converting it to all different things and then making ATP from it. That's all you really need to know. But what's really interesting is when our body is taking in too much fuel, as I said, it doesn't matter if it's carbs, protein or fat, if we're taking in too much that our mitochondria can't keep up. So we know that mitochondria is where we actually produce the ATP, actually make the energy, and that's in our cells. And essentially when we are bringing in too much and our mitochondria are overloaded, we actually end up giving off these things called free radicals. And it sounds like they're really bad. They can be bad in some situations, not all though. They can actually be really useful because what they're going to do is they're going to actually come back out of the mitochondria and signal to a special enzyme called aconitase, which is going to essentially convert the acetyl-CoA that we've been bringing in and start clicking them together, and we're going to start making fat. This is essentially all that's happening. So we're taking those free radicals from the mitochondria when we're trying to make ATP, but if we're getting overloaded, those free radicals are then going to go to the aconitase enzyme and essentially switch off the Krebs cycle and start clicking those acetyl-CoAs, as I said, coming from either carbs, protein or fat, and start combining them and making fatty acids essentially that we can store for another time that we need to make energy. And so essentially what's really cool about this also is that these free radicals can then also go to other steps in this process. They can go and turn off glucose breakdown. So essentially they're going to stop the ingress of glucose coming into the cell. So it's essentially saying we don't need any more, we've got enough, stop bringing it in. It's also going to do the same thing with fatty acid uptake into the cell as well. So essentially all the fat that your body is breaking down and trying to bring into the cell so it can keep breaking it down in the mitochondria, the same thing. The free radicals are going to go to the cell and say, okay, no more, we can't actually take any more in, we're stuffed full. So I think that's really interesting because again, it comes down to not so much what fuel source are you bringing in, but how much are you bringing in? And eventually it gets to a point where it's overloading the mitochondria. But here's what's cool. When we get to the point where we are producing these reactive oxygen species and they are doing this process, occasionally it can be a good thing. You don't want to be doing it every single day, every single meal, because again, it's going to be overloading the mitochondria. We're going to lead to lots of excess fat gain. And a lot of reactive oxygen species are not great in the body. They're quite inflammatory, but in the right amounts, they can be quite useful because let's say occasionally you eat a little bit more than perhaps you usually would. This reactive oxygen species production can also stimulate the production of more mitochondria, so essentially mitochondrial biogenesis. So this is really good because mitochondria is where we do make ATP and where we break down fuel substrates. So the more mitochondria that you actually have throughout your body, the more capacity you will have to be able to break these fuel substrates down in future. So I hope that makes sense. Another thing as well that the body is going to do, which is again so cool because it's so adaptive, is it's going to lead to the stimulus of more ability to cope with the production of these reactive oxygen species. So essentially we're increasing our antioxidant defense systems so that we can handle it. So what I'm saying is that while these reactive oxygen species are going to be the cause of us switching from bringing in energy so we can break it down to make energy, and the production of new fat, they are going to be the cause of that, and they are going to be the cause of us to stop the ingress of more glucose and more fatty acids so we can keep breaking them down. They are going to stop that. But actually, in the long term, it can be good every now and then to stimulate that, because as I said, then it will lead to the production of more mitochondria overall, so that we can better break down fuel substrates in the future as a reactive mechanism of the body, and also an increased ability of antioxidant defense. So I think this is where something like caloric cycling can be quite useful. You don't want to always be overeating, because as I said, then physiologically you're just going to end up putting on more body fat and gaining weight. But you also don't want to be constantly undereating either, because then our body doesn't get that signal to keep producing mitochondria. Everything just kind of slows down. But if you occasionally eat a little bit more than you used to, you might even feel like your body is hot after eating a big meal like that. And that's because your body is working harder to be able to deal with all the fuel substrates. And essentially from that, we're going to create more mitochondria so that we can break down more fuel and create more ATP from that fuel in future.